Hello and welcome to Level 5 Health and Social Care, Unit 5, with looking at the research project. And this is week 3 of looking at Unit 5, and we're going to be looking at some of the research methodologies today. Now, the criteria from your assignment that we're particularly focusing on is 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. 2.1 asks you to evaluate different methodologies used in research and identify an appropriate one to answer your research question. So, as that's the question, I'm going to give you a few different research methodologies. You don't have to evaluate all of them, but you can pick two or three to evaluate. But what you do need to do coming out of 2.1 is to identify which one of these research methodologies you're actually going to use in your own research. Okay. 2.2 is again evaluating the differing data collection methods available for your methodology. So, towards the latter half of this slide session, I'm going to look at a little bit about data collection methods. And you need to identify again which, you can talk a little bit about the couple of different types of data collection, and then just say after your evaluation which one you've chosen, really, and why. So that would be part of your evaluation. 2.3 is to just discuss and carry out your data collection. So we're not really going to talk about that here, but that's something that will be covered. Once you've set your data collection, you then go away and do it. Okay, first of all, let's think about the different types of research and, think about what you might choose to do. The first research we're looking at is something known as applied research. It's very much a scientific style of study, and it seeks to solve practical problems. Applied research sort of tends to find solutions. It can be innovative technology, but with the aim, or it could be research to cure an illness. And it's not really just requiring knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but to actually achieve something, do something, to get a result. A couple of examples I've got for you here. They may investigate ways to improve agricultural crop production or to cure cancer. So you would do bits of research maybe on different drugs, on other different types of therapies that might work, or improve home energy. So you might do some research on solar power or heat pumps and things like that. So. Basic research, often known as pure research or fundamental research, is something that's um, it's driven by a scientist's curiosity or interest, really, and it's about expanding knowledge. So it's often done by people in universities because they sort of have the time and capacity to sort of look at some of these fundamental questions and the funding, I may say, rather than when you're at work. Because when you're at work, you're normally employed to research something to achieve an end, really. So some of the great questions, the Einstein questions, always think like, how did the universe come around? Um, what are protons and neutrons composed of? Obviously they've gone on to be used in different ways, but when Einstein was looking at the theory of relativity, um, I don't think he was thinking about what he could do with it, really. He was just thinking about it's about time we knew how this worked. So, it's sort of like it was a pure piece of research. Something that's commonly used is something called co-relational research, and you'll find that a lot of maybe research articles that you do read up on will be using this. And it's about the study of a relationship between two variables. It's not really about finding cause and effect. So it's not about research saying, why did this happen, or what caused that illness. Say, for instance, it's more about what is the relationship between this variable and that variable, and what effect can they have on the outcome. Um, so it may be two variables that at first glance have nothing in common, but you can actually design experiments to find out if they have an effect. Here's a hypothesis that would be a correlational piece of research. Listening to music lowers blood pressure. Okay, and you would do some research to find out, with experimental groups. You'll have one group who listens to music, sits quietly listening to music. You have another group who just sitting around doing something else, maybe watch TV or that. And then what you do is you probably test their blood pressures after a period of time and finding out if the people listening to music have a lower blood pressure than the people, say, watching TV or doing something else. So it shows the relationships between two variables that on paper may not have much in common, but can actually be quite useful for you. So if you identified that that was correct, which I think we often find it does, um, you could go on to use that maybe as a form of sort of relaxation technique for people who suffer from anxiety and high blood pressure and things like that. So it can actually be quite useful. So correlation research is probably used more often than you think. So one of the advantage of it is you can collect quite a lot of information from many subjects at once. So you can do a survey, you can have like 50 people and 50 people, so you can just gather that. And you could actually have several variables in it as well. So you could come back and do something with, listening to music and doing some deep breaths at the same time, or listening to music and doing some yoga movements at the same time. So does that higher or lower more blood pressure? They are not always produced. Oh, you can look at some variables that you can't always do in a laboratory. So you can use the correlation research to do stuff that's out and about as well. One of the disadvantages of correlational research is it doesn't really indicate what the cause of something is. So if you want to know why listening to music reduces blood pressure, it doesn't really tell you that. It just tells you that it does. But that still can be quite useful depending on what your hypothesis is, what question you're trying to prove. You might not always be trying to prove the cause of something. And sometimes problems with the self-report method is if you give people sort of like a little sheet to fill in about how they feel, sometimes they're not always as clear as they could be, or sometimes they don't always tell the truth as well. So, but with percentage work, you could still get quite something valid. Descriptive research refers to research that provides an accurate portrayal of characteristics, but it's generally known as statistical research. Um, it really can be anything that you can count or study, and it has an impact, really. So lots of things to do with disease is often statistical descriptive research, finding out how many young children have asthma in a town. And then you might go on to look at, the sort of, what the pollution variant is and things like that. So advantages of descriptive research is people are observed and studied. You're not really being part of their lives in that sense. You can sort of do it from standing away, really. So they just carry on with their everyday thing. So they act naturally. You're not influencing them anyway. You sort of take the information afterwards. It can be cheaper than some of the other quantitative experiments. You can collect an awful lot of information. And you can also get other people to, do things for you in different places because it's very observational. It's used to describe, so it doesn't really make any conclusions, but it can be something for you to create your baseline with. The disadvantage is to do it well, you need quite a lot of skill. It doesn't identify the causes immediately. You have to go and do some more research. If you send off questionnaires in this sort of thing, because you're not that involved with them, the response rate can be very low. Whereas if you're doing a piece of work with 10 people and you're actively, working with them in a room, you tend to get more responses. And the results can change over a period of time due to other maybe social or environmental pressures. That means so you might do the effect of asthma on children, between eight the 8 and 10 age group. And if you did it in, say, 2022, the results could be very different from when you did it in 1983 or something, depending on how many cars were on the road, what the town was like, what other things had been put in place and that sort of thing. So it will change. It's usually social and environmental changes. Experimental is probably sort of, again, another classic research that we often think about. It's objective, it's systemic, it's a controlled investigation to predict an outcome. So you usually go into it with an idea of what it is. So it's about finding cause and effect. So in this way, you could say that you would turn that previous question around and say the pollution in East London is the cause of high asthma levels in 8 to 10-year-olds, and then you would go on to prove it. The disadvantages of it can also be that it can be artificial, because it's often, you'd have to do it in a laboratory, or you'd have to bring people in and they wouldn't be in their normal situation, or it could be you bring people in and observe them for behavior. A lot of the behavioral research in psychology and social sciences were done in this way. So Milgram's relation to pain and electric shock, obedience, things like that, were done in this way. But they were brought into a university, so it's all a bit artificial. And sometimes it can be unethical, because you'll be doing things to people maybe against their will, or you just say, I'll give you £50 to be part of my experiment. They do this a lot with students. Some of you may even be aware of it, to let me try out a drug on you, or let me take, so although it's quite useful, I mean, there is issues about whether it should be done or not. So simplest experiment is usually two variables and two groups of participant. So the sort of classic example is you're testing out a new drug. You want to find out if it works, or so say an anti-anxiety or a blood pressure drug or something like that, or a diabetes drug. You have two groups. You have the IV group and the DV group. So you control the IV to study its effect on the DV. So two groups. You have the control group and the experimental group. You randomly assign people to one group or the other. The control group receives no manipulation of the IV, which means that, say, in this case, it's a drug. So the control group is given a drug with nothing in it, or a placebo, as we often know it in scientific experimentation, whereas the experimental group gets the manipulated IV, which is the new drug with the actual active ingredients in it. So it's like the blue pill and the red pill, really. One group gets a pill with nothing in it, but they don't know they've got the pill with nothing in it. And that's why some people think it's unethical. Whereas some people get the pill with the new drug in it, which, if you're someone who's got chronic diabetes and you're hoping that this drug is going to help you, of course, you really hope that you end up being in the experimental group, but you'll never know for the course of the experiment. So that's actually used quite a lot. As I said, there are some ethical issues in it, but a lot of people are willing to do it, especially if they've had a chronic illness for a long time. Exploratory research, type of research conducted for a problem that's not really clearly defined. So it's really about collecting quite a lot of data. It's not really used for decision making, but it just gives you some insight into the current situation. So exploratory research is often used for getting together a baseline before you go on to do your specific experiment. So it's generally quite informal. You tend to rely on secondary research, like literature data that's already available, or information that's already been gathered, and that could be qualitative research, lots of interviews and that. So it will give you a baseline of thought, and from there you'll probably use that. This basic. It's almost like doing your literature reviews. You'll get your basic information before you go on to create your own piece of research. Also, historical research. It's an analysis of events that occurred in the remote or the recent past, and you can use it to show patterns, changes over time, to see, the progress. So, if you imagine you could do some historical research on the management of cancer, and you can really look back over time to see what sort of interventions they used, what sort of interventions were effective, what were not effective, how things progressed, and it gives you a better understanding of where we are now to go on and sort of carry on doing the piece of work. It's the usual sort of thing: historical research, identify the topic, do your literature review, gather your data, evaluate the material, synthesize it, and then think about how you're going to use that. So you'll all do a little bit of that as part of your research project. So you want to say that you're going to, you might do a little bit of historical research, or exploratory research if you haven't got a lot of history available. The strengths of historical research: you've got a nice comprehensive picture of the trends before you go on to do what you do. You've got existing information to work with. It's time consuming. If you're having to go back a long way, the research could be hard. So you've got to be a bit realistic about where you're going. Sometimes it could conflict. One piece of research that you've looked into might conflict with another until you spend a lot of time on it. It might not identify what the cause of the problem is, if that's what you're looking for. And unfortunately, sometimes you can't find the information that you want because in days gone by, maybe it wasn't kept properly, or stuff like that. So it really depends what subject you're choosing. You're going to have to think carefully, and to do that, you're going to have to do some pretty quick Google searches, and see if you can find the historical data that you want at first glance, almost, and then you might decide how you're going to use it. Phenomenological research, don't be put off by the big word. It's very much used in social sciences, sociology, psychology. It's a descriptive research taken from the phenomenological philosophy, and that the phenomenological philosophy, it really just means about one person's experience, how the person, their lived experience, and what they see, and they may see things very differently to you do, about anything really. So it's all about personal knowledge, it's all about subjectivity, and it's all about the person's personal perspective. So it can be quite powerful, really. If it's great for you to get insight into an individual's motivation, so you can see why it's used a lot in the social sciences, such as psychology and that. But it can also sort of take down some of these sort of generalizations that we have. You can probably go ahead and prove for every generalization about people always do that. You could probably do some research, intensive research with individuals who say they don't do that. So it's quite good for challenging generalizations. But it's quite intensive, and it's usually done by people who have long periods of time to work on their research, and it might only just be part of their wider research, really, these sort of. So, on a broader perspective, so we've looked at some research methodologies. You're going to think which one is the most useful to you. On a broader perspective, there are two different types of research. Generally, it's always classified into two groups: the qualitative research and the quantitative research. And you want to think about this as part of your methodology too. Qualitative research deals with things that you can't quantify mathematically. So it's all about beliefs, feelings, meanings, symbols, what people see, and what it means to them. And to do that sort of work, qualitative research, it needs to be fairly in depth. You need to get an understanding of human behaviour. So again, you can see that qualitative research probably used a lot in the social sciences, but can also be used in health research as well, quite important. And it sort of finds, why and how people do things rather than just what and when, what they did when they did it. This is more about the why and the how. So you're sort of delving into people's psyches a little bit more here. The advantages of qualitative research, you can look at more complex aspects of a person's experience. There's not so much restriction or assumptions on the data. It's like you'll gather the information, and out of that you'll find themes that are quite interesting. You don't always know what they're going to come until they come. Not everything can be quantified. You don't be putting it into numbers really that easily. Although you can, from your themes, you could say like 50% of people believe that, from your question, your focus groups and that. More in-depth answers, and the participants are able to give you the information in their own words, in their own way. So there's less misunderstanding between, because you spend a bit more time finding out about it. Disadvantages is because they say things in their own way, you're never sure how reliable that sort of data is, because you have to spend a lot of time checking out your meaning the same as their meaning. So there's more subjectivity in analyzing the data. So if I'm picking out themes from a lot of people's views and opinions, I might pick out different themes to the ones that you might pick out. You might think one theme's more important than I do in that sense. It can be a bit subjective as you analyze it too. It's a bit unintentional, but it can be. There's a lot of data overload because people, if you're interviewing in focus groups or one-to-one interviews, you gather an awful lot of information. Some people will talk a lot, some people will talk less, but even those who don't talk a lot will still give you a lot more information than a yes/no answer. Open-ended questions, which you have to use for qualitative research, you must not use closed questions, can create a lot of data which can take time to analyse. And they can be quite complex to analyse as well, as you can imagine. So qualitative research is more time consuming generally than other types. Now we're looking at quantitative research, which is basically a systemic investigation using statistics, mathematical, or, if you've got a big lot, using a computer, basically. The objective of quantitative research is to develop and employ mathematical models. So you're looking at finding sort of averages, mean, medians, those sorts of things. Generally used up made in scientific methods. You may use some instruments to measure things or particular scientific methods to measure things. You collect empirical data, and then you analyze the data and you evaluate the results. Okay, there may be some control and manipulation of variables, like with your experiments, with your control group and your experimental group, but that's all laid out very clearly, and you can sort of do it elsewhere as well. Advantages of quantitative research is you can measure and analyze. The measurements tend to be quite clear. 100 people want this, 70 people want that. It's sort of a lot easier to measure. The research is more objective. They tend to stand away from it, and you're just looking at the numbers. So you don't get that involved as you do like when you're working with focus groups and asking people their views and opinions, and then you're trying to interpret that. Quantitative research can be used to test hypotheses and experiments because of its ability to measure data using statistics. So, if you want a quick statistic, that's what you want to do. The disadvantage is that doesn't really care about the context. It's sort of very face value, really. So if you're just doing something, say like going back to one of our previous examples, if you wanted just to prove that asthma between 8 and 10-year-olds has increased in South London, you can probably prove that. But it doesn't really talk about the context. It doesn't really talk about the whys and wherefores. Is it because the children are playing in different places? Is it because their park has closed down and they have to play out in the street? Is it because they have to walk further to school because something's not available or the bus service has changed? All those contexts would not get picked up like they would if you were doing qualitative data where you were interviewing people, because they would say, well, of course, she gets a lot iller now because she can't play in the green park that's no longer available. They've built a housing estate on it or something. Quantitative research doesn't study things in a natural setting. It's usually very scientific, in the lab or, in the university room or something. It doesn't discuss the different meanings things have for different people. So there's no sort of independent views involved in it. And to get really accurate results, you should do large samples for good quantitative research. If you're only doing it with 5 people, and then you say 75% of the people say this, well, although that is true, it's not really much of a statistic. If you're doing 75 people and 50% of the people say yes, they like something, that's a bit more of a statistic, really. You can actually go back to your bosses and say, well, actually, as in a town of 150,000, 500 people out of 750 like this, you've got a better statistic. There's a little bit of a definition. This shows again the differences, and hopefully it will help you the different collection methods you would use and some of the question examples. So qualitative, as I said, it's data that it's generally numerically analysed. Quantitative, non-numerical, it's about opinions and feelings. The collection methods are obviously different. The qualitative, you can do online, in-person, phone interviews, close-ended questions, yes, no questions. Do you like this? Like the sort of stuff you often bobs up on your phone with the adverts. Do you like this? And you got 3 options, yes, no. Or a controlled experiment, say like our little drug experiment. Your collection methods for quantitative will be focus groups, surveys, but they'd have to be open-ended questions where they can have, lots of room to give a chatty answer and that sort of thing. Unstructured interviews or just observation, really, watching people go through what they do. The sort of analysis you probably use for qualitative: charts, tables, stats, pie charts, bar graphs, those sorts of things. The analysis is more about trawling through and finding themes and issues, really, that you can group. Question example of a qualitative data is: did you buy an ice cream today? Yes or no? So you could say 30 people bought an ice cream today. Quantitative is: why did you buy an ice cream today? I was thirsty. I was hungry. I was hot. I needed, I had a bad day and I needed something to cheer me up. All sorts of different answers you can get, and you would find the themes in that. Data example of qualitative: 67% of respondents bought an ice cream today. Quantitative is like just picking out a statement. So this one, you're looking at impulse buys, maybe. I saw an ice cream on sale by the checkout as an impulse buy. I wanted to treat myself. So you might find that half the people that answered you said it was an impulse buy. And it could be because the supermarket was doing a promotion of them. You could find that out eventually by the questioning. So just think about what you might need to use. So looking at, again, reminding you of data collection. A true experiment research will be observational data collection, drug trials, any other trials, or tracking performance data. But it'd be testing and measuring, really. Quasi experimental research, that's sort of like in between the two, really. Again, you'd be maybe tracking performance data over the last couple of years, observational. You could do some attitude data collection, but you could also do collections from management information systems. So if you're doing something in your care home, you can look at some of the statistics that you already gather. You know, you could be doing something about health and safety incidents, or if that's what you're doing. You could actually go from management information system, ask the care manager if you could have a look at the health and safety reports and see, you know, what things have come up the most. Non-experimental research is all quantitative, sorry. Surveys with close-ended questions, interview questionnaires, but very short, sharp, to the point. And again, using your management information system or using data from the census, stuff like that. You know, census gives you a massive amount of information. If you've got one that happened recently, you've got a lot of data there. Online polls, Facebook polls, yes, no, don't know answers, those sorts of things. The qualitative data collection methods are a bit different. Individual interviews, qualitative surveys are those are the ones with big boxes for you to not just say yes or no, but write what you think. Focus group discussions, very popular, really, and quite a good way of doing it because you can talk to a few people at once. You can look at records and also maybe look at case studies, look at individual case studies as well. That would help in the right area. And observations, and obviously observations take a bit of time, but you could be observing, you know, 2 or 3 of your care home residents and how they react to the food, that sort of thing. And then maybe do a little focus group with them afterwards. But also you could observe them, you know, do they show that they're enjoying it? Do they leave some of it? Those sorts of things, yeah. And then you could do a focus group with them afterwards about what was it they didn't like. So those are different options. So next, do some reading. I've given you a research methods handbook in extra reading, which is very comprehensive and give you lots of ideas for you to work out what sort of research methods you're going to use and how to sort of collect data. So you know, you can base it on that handbook, and you can choose your data collection methods, particularly from that handbook. So think about what these different methods are. Think about what you need to consider. Think about choosing the right method for your research project. You've got to be able to address criteria 2.2 and evaluate why you've made your choice. Evaluate isn't just a simple explanation, but it's a pros and cons thing, you know. So you might want to compare it. So say you chose to do focus groups as opposed to observation. And you can say, you know, why did I choose to do focus groups? Because I can do them quickly. I can speak to quite a few people at once. I have time constraints because this assignment isn't that long. It's not 6 months. I can't go and study a group of people, you know, once a week for 2 hours for 6 months, which is what I would need to do it if I was observational. So you got to think about why are you doing that and not that. Okay, so be prepared. Um, have a read of the Research Methods Handbook. I said it's really, really helpful. But what you can do is if you are unsure and you've got an idea of what your question is, and you're still, you know, am I going the right way? Quantitative, qualitative, is this the right way? Just ping me something on WhatsApp and you know, I will give you some advice. Okay. So if you want to roll your ideas around through me, please do so. Okay, that's it really. So good luck with that. And this week you should really start be getting to grips. Hopefully you've got a good idea of your question by now, and you should start thinking about what your data collection is going to be, what approach you're taking, and how you're going to do it. So really start brainstorming the ideas that you're going to do. And by the end of this week, I think you should be pretty clear that you know what you want to do. Like I said, if you are unsure, ping me a WhatsApp. I will get back to you pretty quick to help you sort of go on and make your decisions. Okay, good luck with that. And I will see you for the next week's one.